Did Irene deserve death because she was beautiful? Whatever the motive, she didn't deserve murder. Wondering, I observed the parade of cars as they anchored to get a seat in the auditorium of crime. Was it possible that whoever killed Irene was watching too? Nellie had good reason to hate Irene, as did a long list of others. Mrs. Baker, Julie Sampson, Dr. Harper, Lizzie, and Sally were at the forefront of my thoughts. But every man who had ever suffered an enchanting smile from the schoolteacher should be added to the list. Poor Irene, resting on a stainless steel table waiting to go under yet another knife, had many enemies. Of course, I left out Ian. Despite his many flaws, I could never believe him capable of committing such a crime. Yet, I could believe it of the others. Lyndon had a tough job sorting through the evidence and the long list of motives that even I concocted in my head. Don't say that. I texted back. Nellie hadn't recovered, and I couldn't blame her. She had 2 children to care for. And because of Irene, she went from being happy and married to the brink of irretrievable divorce. Ron had been the first victim to succumb to Irene's charm. When Irene hired him to paint the cottage she rented, the friendship started with good intentions. Next, Nellie walked in on them, and the fallout became a contentious battle. Nellie wasn't one to let a wrong go unpunished. She hired the best divorce lawyer, and Ron was in trouble. His affair with Irene ended as abruptly as it started. I struck both off my list. Ron, I couldn't see it. He fell for Irene because he was a man who had never sampled what she was offering. Yes, he should have known better, said the fish at the end of the lure. Nellie. I could see Nellie's plan for Irene unfold. Nellie would set trap after trap and dismantle Irene from the inside out. A plan of making Irene's life unpleasant in the village was already in the works. But murder? Never. Dr. Harper. I never liked him. Ever since we were children in school, his hoity-toity attitude separated him a gift he inherited from his mother. I also saw his dark side when I walked in on him abusing old Mrs. Miller. It wasn't the behavior I expected from a professional, but I saw what he was capable of and witnessed it. He and his mother thought Irene was a good match among the few choices that came their way. Most local women were not of the sort of caliber that they had in mind as a doctor's wife. You're right. Did I hear that you found her? News in town traveled like a rocket. Although many aspects of the village were antiquated, the internet made victims of us all. I did. But I can't talk about it. It was a lie. Lyndon never told me to keep quiet. I needed that protective blanket to spare me the Inquisition. Are you all right? Lyndon suggested I speak with someone. The shock of discovering a dead body was slowly surfacing within me. I am. For now. Julie Sampson, aka Irene's best friend. Only the friendship didn't survive a month. Before Irene arrived, rumors about Julie's sexual orientation drifted on the mill. Julie was a decent person, and she was the driving force behind Irene succeeding in filling the vacancy. As the school's principal, Julie pulled rank. What she interpreted as Irene's overtures left a wide berth difficult to pass, but Julie might have been so in love with Irene that she'd rather have her under her thumb than not at all. Lizzie and Sally didn't mince words. They knew the reason Julie hired Irene. Mrs. Baker. Every small town has a Mrs. Baker, a busybody and menace. She often appears in classic literature, sometimes known as the evil witch. Mrs. Baker hated everyone. End of story. I made those accusations as quiet observations. And I should have added myself to the list. Because of Irene, Ian and I were on the brink of falling apart. Of all the men in town, my husband had a history and an incurable wandering eye. Maybe, because his eyes were so startlingly blue, it was difficult to hide their gaze. Stricken, I watched as Irene stirred Ian's desire, although he resented my accusations. When I heard the gravel crunch in the drive, I knew it had to be Lyndon. I brushed my hair behind my ears and inhaled so that I could smile when I answered the door. "Is now a good time?" Lyndon asked. As predicted, his hair had revolted and curled. There wasn't a hat that could contain the mop of ringlets. Scissors were an option, but it was a shame when the barber sheared him like a lamb. "Come in." "Tea?" Lyndon nodded. Outside in the wind, the temperature dropped to near freezing. His cheeks were ruddy, and cold air hung like a sheet over him. "Ian not home?" "No. Out with the sheep." I lied. I had no idea where Ian was. Last night, he and I argued, and he stormed out, telling me that my fits of jealousy were unjustified and childish. "Can you go over with me what you saw this morning? And why on God's earth were you out there? You know it isn't safe on that beach." "Never has been." Lyndon was referring to the death of Ben Ross. Ben liked walking on the beach at strange hours too. On his last foray, he broke his ankle, and before he could climb to higher ground, the tide came for him. A gruesome Ben Ross story kept many adults and children away. I know. I didn't need a lecture. From pages of our past, Lyndon knew something on that stretch of beach that called to me. Like I said, I was out walking, hoping for a photo op. The light this morning had that quality I was looking for. That was a lie too. I walked on the beach to worry Ian as I had agonized all night until I couldn't stand another minute. I was so angry, I wasn't reasonable. That I brought my camera came as a surprise to me too. I lost all track of all sanity while I talked myself into a stupor, convinced that Ian and Irene were having an affair. At 2, 3, and 4 o'clock in the morning, my fabricated truth blinded me, but suspicions are never reasonable. "Do you know where your boat is?" "My boat?" My boat was a small outboard. It wasn't worth anything, and I used it seldom. "Yes. We did a count at the marina. Yours is missing." "Missing?" I said incredulously. I hadn't used the old boat in months. On occasion, I lent it out. It bobbed on the swell that ducked under the swaying dock most days. Ian never went near it, he had a fear of water, which he couldn't face. My boat. I tried to remember who used it last with my permission. But the statement landed like an accusation that somehow my boat was tied to Irene's death. I have no idea. I haven't used it since last summer. Old Standish says it was there a few days ago. He's sure since it's tied next to his. Are you suggesting something? You know I'm not. But I must ask. That's my job. Tell me what you remember about the last time you used it or lent it out. Lending my boat out always came with payment in fish, lobster, or crab. The larger vessels, which fished offshore, used my old clunker. It became a useful tool when scaling barnacles off their hull. Wait. I might be able to give you a firm date. Lyndon followed me to the back door. Inside the summer kitchen was a freezer. Because Ian raised sheep and sold lamb, we needed a deep freeze. I dived into the frozen bundles of meat and rummaged. Sullivan. That is who had used my boat last. He paid me with too many lobsters, which Ian and I processed. I made lobster bisque I would have dated. Frozen smoke emanated from the container marked in my writing December 10, 2018, as it met the warmer temperature. Lobster bisque. Lyndon wrote the information on his pad. That's 4 months ago. No one else since? Not that I know of. Occasionally someone takes it out, but you know old Standish and his buddies keep an eye out. What about Ian? Lyndon didn't phrase the accusation in words. He implied them with his eyes. Eyes I had never forgotten. I turned away. How dare he accuse Ian and me of Irene's death? I could feel his gaze linger on my back, so I raised myself. Really? You're accusing Ian? I have to ask. True. But it sounds like you've already made up your mind. Not true. Where was Ian last night? To divert attention away from the question, I reached for the dishcloth. Wiping imaginary stains, I said, if Ian took the boat, the entire town would be abuzz with the news. He never goes near the water. I know about Ian's tragic past. But our past, anyone's past, doesn't rule them out. You'd better go. Ian's not home. As I told you, he's with the sheep. Lambing season. I took his cup and turned away. My stupidity had turned my husband into a suspect, while my selfishness had turned my world upside down. Listen. Rosie. I'm sorry that I have to do this. To hear my name spoken aloud by Lyndon made my eyes well. Rosie. Years ago, I was his Rosie, and he, my Sean. Everyone in town called Sean by his professional name now. Detective Lyndon. In this small community, nothing was a secret. Everyone was a cog in the wheel and belonged, whether they wanted that distinction or not. Go. I'll ask Ian to get in touch with you. I heard Lyndon push the kitchen chair under the table. While I waited for him, I felt his hand hovering as if he wanted to reach out and touch me. I listened for him to leave. Max barked to announce that he and his alpha had descended the mountain. Because the dog was faster, he was the first to arrive. I could see Ian a few hundred